is this the genuine kind of expression of understanding of the extent and the facts and the implication of the entire nightmare that has been being experienced by the people who have been the victims of the pandemic and the associated negligence, and lack of care. This is something that should have been the feature on the inside pages of the Daily Mirror, not the front page. As we have been saying, the newspapers, Fleet Street newspapers, are not telling readers and the public who actually treat them, these papers, as newspapers, and people who are affected by the newspapers, they are not telling the truth about what is going on. That is the reality. This is a spin. It is a spin, and it may personally kind of make Kate Garraway feel good about the whole thing, but this is not the kind of thing that should be. This should be the item, if there was any human interest kind of angle that the Daily Mirror was looking for. This should be the front page. Because these are the people who died trying to cross the channel to Britain. Now, not only the subject, but the actual kind of role of the UK government in causing this kind of desperation. Not only the UK government, but also the United Nations itself. Because in the month of the United Nations celebrating or marking the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, this has happened. And this is something that the United Nations knew was happening. So the United Nations can issue kind of telling off to Asian and African kind of governments, which are absolutely fine, because they need to be told off when they deserve to be. But there is a significant absence of similar telling off by the United Nations bureaucracy of Western governments and states. And the leading Western governments and states in this context are France and the UK. The United Nations should have actually published a detailed account by now of the various factors leading to the drowning of this family and the two children and the parents. It hasn't done that. And the French president, Macron, and the French kind of media have been obsessed with the freedom to express contempt and incite hatred against Muslims. This has nothing to do with the freedom of expression. In the time of the pandemic, in the time of the migrants drowning in the channel between England and France, freedom of expression becomes an obscenity when it is not even exercised about the freedom to express the truth about why millions of people are in such a desperate situation to seek asylum and refuges in Western countries. That is the freedom of expression that the French media and Charlie Hebdo should be kind of concentrating on. That would be the real humanitarian kind of combination of the freedom and the sensitivity and the compassion to the people who are being literally sunk and drowned by the policies of the governments in France and in the UK, and the complicity in that complacency by the corrupt bureaucracy that controls the United Nations propaganda activities. The United Nations has been focusing remarkably, kind of noticeably, on African women and children in other kind of spheres, but not on the plight of the African children and women who are desperate to leave their countries and to find refuge and asylum and, quote, safety in the Western countries. That is not something that the United Nations is doing. So we'll be coming to the press and the media and the propaganda. Oh my God. So the over the top promotion by the Daily Mirror for Wills and Kate gets even worse. On that page, they've got a piece about Harman Ousley. The Harman Ousley, that's the one. Harman Ousley, after Trevor Terrible Phillips, is the one that the racists have actually fostered in Britain. And they're completely wrongly describing him in the Mirror there, that he got an award. What is it called? Pride of Britain Award for his life's work. Notice this, life's work campaigning for racial equality in football. Now this complete mental slave, Harman Ousley, is a liar as well, because he lied his way and nominated himself to the House of Peers when he was a member of a kind of committee set up by the Tony Blair regime for nominating other people. He nominated himself. This has been pointed out by the Welsh MP Chris Bryant on the floor of the House of Commons about the corruption of the nominating system. So that was Ousley making himself a member of the House of Peers by brazenly abusing the kind of committee that he was made a member of under the regime of Tony Blair. And here Ousley is extensively kind of quoted. And he packages everything in there in a typical way. He's a complete, absolute mental slave and liar. And this is the kind of thing that the Daily Mirror is getting wrong. instead of talking about racism, they are peddling a slave, mental slave that actually has been obstructing the fight against racism at every level. He has had a career as the official ethnic mental kind of slave who has been given serial kind of positions in various local councils, etc., where he has sabotaged the local communities in order to keep his kind of relevance as the mental slave active and ongoing. And this is not the first time that the Daily Mirror and the Fleet Street have actually promoted him. They have promoted him, and they will promote him in the future as well, no doubt, because it suits the racist agenda of denial and displacement and the kind of cover up of the reality of racism, because there is no evidence whatsoever that Woosley has made any anti-racist kind of organization stronger by encouraging and supporting and following genuine people engaged in fighting racism. There is none. And because of this, the racists have given Woosley serial platforms, including a platform about Yorkshire where the Muslims were being targeted as a community by racists opposing any contribution by the Islamic faith to the curriculum in schools that the parents preferred. So Woosley could not be more unfit, unsuitable for such an inquiry, and he was made a kind of chair of an inquiry into the Muslims of Yorkshire. You cannot imagine a similar kind of setup where the people of African backgrounds or Caribbean backgrounds are under attack by the state and by the racists, and that kind of situation is being inquired into by an outfit which is chaired by an Asian or a Muslim, let alone a Muslim. It has not happened. So the racists and anti-Muslim elements in the kind of media have been promoting the mental slave Herman Woosley in full knowledge that his service to the cause of racism fits their agenda narrative of denying the existence of racism at every stage and their collusion and their profiting from racism. So this is the second failure by the Daily Mirror today. Well, third failure really. Because the drowning of the migrants actually is part of the problem caused by racism. And this is the kind of denial of racism, killing people, racist policies killing people, that constitutes what is Fleet Street. Fleet Street is doing the same thing about the deadly disaster of the failure of the various research experts and investigators into the pandemic in Britain. And there is no narrative. And we said that, and we are saying again, that the only thing that will make a difference for the better in terms of protecting people from the virus is if the main factors that are common as being the physical factors involved in the contact with the virus and its actual activities up to the end of it. If those were given in updated forms, the news coverage, prominent news coverage, then the people would begin to understand what the real health kind of dynamics were in relation to this virus. What are the factors? And there is nothing in the mirror, there is nothing in the sun which is making a joke of this. And they are fixated on this thing. They are fixated on keeping the kind of Christmas going. Now, without going into, we are not going into the discussion about whether the thing that they celebrate as Christmas is really to do with the Christian religion or not, because that would take up more time than we have for this kind of program, which is to look at the Fleet Street Papers role. But they are saying here, Harry Cole has written a piece which is this clause, not laws. They're saying that Christmas COVID killjoys were told to back off yesterday after police threatened to break up festive family gatherings. Now they're conflating too many things in there, in that one sentence. And they're saying that the police are now trying to ruin people's Christmas because people who are informing the police on other people not following the rules are going to give the police the excuse to sabotage people's Christmas. Again, on the page, inside page 9 of the Sun, they're doing the same thing as the Mirror has done about the family that drowned. And this should have been the front page, but of course it's the Sun. The Sun would not have that as the front page because that would show up the Sun's anti-migrants, racist kind of quote crusade as being responsible for the deaths of these people because they are contributing to the pressure on the UK government fronted by Boris Johnson to not only keep the racist hostility to migrants and asylum seekers active, but to make it even worse and therefore expose people like this family to similar fates. And so far, the papers have not shown any evidence that Keir Starmer has even noticed what happened to this family and the parents and the children. In fact, Starmer is featuring in a completely different kind of story of his own. Starmer has been involved in a car crash on a cycle rider or cyclist. And apparently, according to reports in the last 2 days, Starmer left the scene of the crash. And the point has been made that before the police arrived, although it is admitted that he did exchange his details with the cyclist. But the point is that Starmer left the scene without the police arrived, instead of waiting for the police to arrive. So Starmer behaved in an unacceptable way. And what they're saying in the Sun, and there is a piece about the report on Labour Party's anti-Semitism. The Sun is calling it ruling on Labour Jew hate, and that is due today. And it's a report by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And it says that the Corbyn-led Labour Party was institutionally, what is it calling it? Institutionally anti-Semitic. It's not saying institutionally racist. So the report is about the aspect of the Labour Party leadership of Jeremy Corbyn that relates to hate against the Jewish people. Now, whether it is based on the Jewish faith or whether it's based on Jewish ethnicity is not yet clear in this particular summary. Perhaps they will make a clear distinction between those two when they actually publish the report later today, Thursday, 29th of October 2020. Whatever their distinction or not, we shall be diagnosing the report and the implications in due course after it has been published and it has been promoted and peddled by the Fleet Street and Fleet Street-like counterparts on the mainstream television channels. So the role of the Sun is obviously to newcomers, we call it the scum, but that is based on its racist role, hateful role, and reactionary role over the decades since Rupert Murdoch acquired it in the late 60s or early 70s. And so the Sun is advising, Sun meaning Rupert Murdoch is advising Keir Starmer to get the Labour Party freed from the likes of the momentum and the extreme left, it calls them. Now, here is a piece about the housing fraud that is being printed on page 15 of the Sun, and it's a piece about Afsana Begum, who is a member of Parliament from Tower Hamlets constituency of Poplar and Limehouse, or Limehouse and Poplar. Now, this is the same person who in 2013 was employed in the Tower Hamlets Council, and in that position as an employee of the Tower Hamlets Council, she sent to this campaign this is Thursday, this dated Thursday. There was a message mentioning her. Yes, this is the item on at 18:28 hours, 11 October 2012. And the Odhikar campaign, which is part of the Odhikar Rights Weekly, London, established on Monday, 19th of December 1980. Now, the Odhikar is part of the Khoodeelaar campaign, and it says in that short note, left message for Alibor, that is Alibor Chaudhry, one with Apsana in the office while Kerry is away on leave. Now, Apsana is that same Apsana Begum. We shall be talking about her again in a minute. Left message for Lutfur with Saeed, another employee, in the office while Carol Saich was otherwise busy. Carol Saich, S-A-I-C-H. Now, Carol Saich was at that time apparently commuting from Scotland to Tower Hamlets to do the work. And the gist of the message was on the 11th of October 2012. Why has neither Alibor nor Lutfur answered their mobiles, which I had called during the day? I meaning I, Muhammad Haq. So this is Afsana Begum, 8 years later, again in October 2020. That was her taking a message while Miss Kerry Jeeves was away. Kerry Jeeves was one of the contacts who became involved in communications during the following years that followed. That is 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, while Lutfur Rahman was in post. Now, Afsana Begum is being featured here in this article. We shall be going over it in full for a number of reasons. First of all, we have established that she was working in Tower Hamlets Council, so-called mayor's office, in October 2012. So let's see if they mention Tower Hamlets Council in this one. So this headline says jumped 18,000 flat queue, that is waiting list of 18,000. Tower Hamlets Council waiting list 18,000, yes. And of course, she's being called Labour MP in housing fraud rap. Exclusive by Tom Wells. And it says a Labour MP and close Jeremy Corbyn ally has been charged with housing fraud. Afsana Begum, 30, entered Parliament at last December's general election with a giant 28,904 majority in East London's Poplar and Limehouse. But she has been accused of 3 offences relating to how she was given her council flat. She is due before magistrates on December the 10th. If convicted, Miss Begum could face a jail sentence and lose her commons seat. We told last November, we meaning the Sun, that she was facing a probe over the riverside flat she moved into after leaving her estranged husband's home. Investigators wanted to know how she had leapt to the top of an 18,000 strong housing list so quickly despite having no children. At the time, Miss Begum denied any wrongdoing, claiming her housing situation was in a state of flux after her marriage breakdown, and she insisted there was no probe. That is, she denied that she was being under investigation. But charges have been brought against her in recent days. Miss Begum is thought to have applied for a Tower Hamlets Council flat while living with her family in 2011. She moved in with her husband in 2014, but they split a year later. Within 6 months, she was offered the one bed Isle of Dogs pad in a block on the Thames. It is run by a housing association, but tenants are council nominated. Now, that is the first mention of the council. Far left Momentum member Miss Begum was a controversial choice as Labour candidate. Okay, far left Momentum member Miss Begum was a controversial choice as Labour candidate. She was once an assistant to corrupt Mayor Lutfur Rahman. That is the reference that I have just kind of read. On the 11th of October 2012, I left a message with her for Alibor Chowdhury. And Alibor Chowdhury was the closest ally and de facto kind of spokesperson and chief of operations for Lutfur Rahman's regime as incumbent mayor at that time, and throughout his entire number of years that Lutfur Rahman was officially in place until both of them got named by the election commissioner, Richard Morey, Mawrey, Richard Morey, who announced his findings against Lutfur Rahman on the 23rd of April 2015. And Morey sat in a room in the Royal Courts of Justice. He didn't have to, because as election commissioner, he could have conducted his hearings at a location in Tower Hamlets itself. But for strategic reasons, whoever decided on this one, they created a profile about the case by citing the hearings at the Royal Courts of Justice. So anyone who says that Richard Morey, was a High Court judge is not telling the truth, because he was capable of being called a judge in some capacity, but he sat there for the duration of the hearing as the election commissioner, which is not the same thing as a judge of the High Court, which is how he has been misrepresented and misreported. Anyway, so we made the connection that I left a message with Afsana Begum on Thursday. Was it a Thursday? Whatever. Yes, it was a Thursday, 11th of October 2012, but 18:28 hours. I have made a note, and that is when I left the message with her. She answered the phone. Whatever the time she answered the phone that I had called to speak to somebody called Kerry Gibbs, Geeves, who was the mayor's kind of office staff, one of the mayor's office staff. And I spoke to another person called Saeed, who answered the phone that I had rung for somebody else who was in the mayor's office at the time, but not at the time of the call, called Carol Saich, Saich. So she's said here by the Sun, far left Momentum member Miss Begum was a controversial choice as Labour candidate. She was once an assistant to corrupt Mayor Lutfur Rahman. That is the role of assistance, that she took the message from me for Lutfur Rahman. For Alibar Chaudhry was in effect part of the Lutfur Rahman kind of persona administratively, because it was Alibar Chaudhry who was named by Richard Morey as the closest member of Lutfur Rahman's regime, who did most of Lutfur Rahman's, quote, bidding and work and communications. So this is Lutfur Rahman, who was booted out for rigging an election. She also shared claims ex-Labour MP PM Tony Blair was spreading Zionist propaganda. Okay, so we shall read the sentence again. She was once an assistant to corrupt Mayor Lutfur Rahman, who was booted out for rigging an election. She also shared claims that ex-Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair was spreading Zionist propaganda. Last night, her lawyers told the Sun, Miss Begum vigorously contests these malicious and false allegations. She cannot comment in any further detail. They added there were continued concerns about Miss Begum's safety. Now, what that is not described, but let's go back to page 10, where the Sun has got the main headline kind of editorial is about Keir Starmer and the extremists in the Labour Party. Let's read that again, and that is where the reference to momentum again occurs. This is the piece that the Sun says Starm offensive. That is nothing to do with Keir Starmer failing to defend the communities affected by the pandemic or his crashing of his car on a Deliveroo cyclist delivering food. Now, here is the Sun piece that says Storm offensive. Cranky Corbyn might be back on the back benches where he belongs. Cranky Corbyn might be back on the back benches where he belongs, but his miserable legacy lives on. Today, the race watchdog will make a historic ruling on whether Her Majesty's opposition became constitutionally anti-Semitic under his leadership. And astonishingly, as the Sun reveals today, one of his MPs, that is Corbyn's MPs, or MP cronies, has just been charged with 3 counts of housing fraud. Car accidents aside, Sir Keir Starmer appears keen to prove that he is a statesman in waiting. But British voters don't respond well to racism and fraud. So unless he makes a stand against the dregs of hard left in the ranks, his election chances will be racked by 2024. election meaning his election, or the election of the Labour Party led by him to form a government in the scheduled election as scheduled for 2024. If the Equality and Human Rights Commission rules against the former Labour leader today, Jeremy Corbyn must be ousted from the party. Yes, Momentum supporters might scuttle off after him, but some loss. They are extremists who fantasize about fighting oppressors in the streets and they repulse ordinary Brits. Starmer has been given the opportunity to rest, that is WREST, Labour back from the hard left. He should seize it with both hands. Now, that editorial is about, of course, anti Semitism and Afsana Begum's housing fraud. And as the Sun has said, now let's see if there is anything else on Afsana Begum that we can access. Well, it seems that she was not, apparently, she was not a favorite candidate, but she managed to get in. So we shall be looking at So the item about Afsana Begum in the Sun has been copied by the Daily Mail, and we shall be looking at housing. Housing in the context of the claim. And she has been quoted as saying that housing was a lifeline. Let's check if the Daily Mail has got it in the print. It may or may not have it, but it has got it online. And we shall be talking about the Daily Mail, of course, in relation to the failure to give the evidence and the evidence-based information to readers about the virus and what is going on physically in terms of the contact and the impact of the virus. Now, the piece in the Daily Mail on page 14 about the report that is due to be published today by the Equality and Human Rights Commission is headed Labor Day of Shame, Damning Inquiry into Anti-Semitism, Scandals under Corbyn, published today. And on the same page, they have got a smaller item, but it's underneath the picture of Margaret Hodge. That is the kind of piece they have. And the piece is there. Where is the... Well, the piece is headline, Party Activist Faces Prison Over Abuse. And it says a Corbynite Labour activist is facing jail for bombarding 3 politicians with anti-Semitic abuse. Now, this is not about Afsana Begum, it's about a person called Nicholas Nelson, age 31, who made threatening phone calls to Jewish Labour MP Dame Margaret Hodge and left messages branding her racist Zionist scum. John Mann. Now, Mann is not a Labour peer. John Mann was made a peer by the Tories as a reward for Mann's role in sabotaging the kind of leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. And it says the Daily Mail wrongly labels John Mann as Labour peer. Continuing, and former MP Louise Allman heaping abuse on their parliamentary assistants and ranting that the politicians should die. In a statement in court yesterday, Dame Margaret said the abuse disturbed her. At a hearing last month, Nelson was left facing jail after admitting 3 counts of sending communications of an offensive nature. In 2018, Magistrate Emma Arbuthnot yesterday adjourned sentencing to November 25th. Nelson was bailed until then. Now, this is not, the Daily Mail is not running any piece about Afsana Begum in the print version, because they picked up the piece from the Sun online about 4 hours after it went online, or 5 hours. So they didn't have time to include that in the print edition of today's Daily Mail. But the Daily Mail does have enough kind of time to do the piece on the other one. And they have got enough space on the front page and on pages 2 and 3 for an extended kind of piece for Tracy Emin. Tracy Emin needs no introduction because she has made a career based on her personal life, and this is not an exception. Now, we go back to talking about Hamlet's Council and housing, because that message that I left with Afsana Begum, the message actually was for Alibor Chaudhry. That message I left with Afsana Begum in 2012, on the 11th of October 2012, was only a very small number of items that I communicated for the action of Lutfur Rahman and addressed those to her. There were only a few, because she didn't actually deal with most of the communications, because she was coming to me as a surprise kind of person in later communications emails. She came across as if she was part of the inner circle of Ohid Ahmad, who was in post as deputy to Lutfur Rahman, or as a member of the inner circle controlled by Lutfur Rahman. I had never addressed anything directly to Afsana Begum as a member of the council's staff. She came by email to me on behalf of either Lutfur or Ohid, or maybe on behalf of Lutfur, but directly on the instructions of Alibor Chaudhry. I cannot establish the exact kind of trace or the kind of origins of these instructions, but I got a few from Afsana Begum, and one that I shall be updating with in a later edition is the one that she sent either in 2012 or in 2013. And it was a completely typical representative communication. I don't know whether she wrote all of it herself or whether she was told it by somebody and she sent it in her name from her email address in the council at the time. But it was a communication about housing. And the contrast between the many millions of pounds that Lutfur Rahman abused and spent in order to boost his particular kind of political career, and the lies that Lutfur Rahman peddled to me via Alibor Chaudhry and other staff, including the likes of Afsana Begum, must be noted for sheer brazenness in abusing the position of elected mayor. Now, my campaign against Tower Hamlets Council's corruption and Tower Hamlets Council's corruption in housing spans 50 years or more. It goes back to the 1960s when I was not in residence in Stepney, but from a distance I was dealing with Tower Hamlets Council predecessor, Stepney Borough Council, in the 60s on behalf of my family. Now, so I have got experience and knowledge and insight into Tower Hamlets Council's role and behavior that is entirely based on contacts with the council or its predecessor, the Stepney Borough Council. And based on that evidence, I know that Tower Hamlets, the population in the borough, have never been given the service in basic needs that their local council or the local borough council owed them. It's important because Tower Hamlets Council still today, 29th of October 2020, is engaged in communications to external bodies, including the UK central government departments, which communications include the claim that Tower Hamlets is a deprived borough. And as I have said before, Tower Hamlets Council uses, that is, in fact, misuses, but it uses, that is to say, it applies, it kind of carries with it the claim that it is a deprived borough. So therefore, the council deserves what I can call a deprivation allowance of hundreds of millions extra every year. Now that is if that is money that they actually match with the needs of the people that they actually serve, then I have no problem with that. No decent person would have any problem with that. The problem arises when Tower Hamlets Council uses that and gets money, not necessarily always the same amount it asks for, or not always hundreds of millions. Sometimes it gets less than hundreds of millions. But whatever money it does get under deprivation, it abuses a lot of it, or a chunk of it, or major part of it. Now, there has not been any judicial investigation into the behavior of Tower Hamlets Council in abusing funds, in abusing its remits, in abusing its duties and pushing people into hardship. One of the hardships that any human being can be caused is the loss of their housing, or the housing rights, housing amenities. So when Afsana Begum wrote emails to me during up to 2013 on behalf of Ohid Ahmed or on behalf of Lutfur Rahman, because she was employed in the so-called mayor's office, which is where I had left that message with her for the mayor's office staff called Ms. Kerry Jeeves in 2012. So when Afsana Begum wrote to me on behalf of Lutfur Rahman or on behalf of Wahid Ahmad, she did communicate things that were absolutely untrue. As I said, she did not say whether she wrote the whole thing or she was given the thing to send to me from her email address in the council. The fact is that she communicated to me contents that were untrue, untruthful, offensive, disrespectful, in breach of the law. And I'll go into some detail as to how. The duties of the local council, such as Tower Hamlets Council, span many kind of disciplines. Housing is one of the most important needs any human being faces and needs. And this needs to be addressed based on the need, on the evidence, on the fact. But as the evidence shows, the behavior of Tower Hamlets Council employees, including the benefits manager called Steve Hill, and the behavior of other personnel in the council, including Aman Dalby, who was a director and who abused his position and his ethnicity in claiming extra benefits and extra money and extra favors from the council. And it was a fact that Aman Dalby was given special kind of, if you like, dispensation from obligations by Lutfur Rahman on the basis that Dalby, as a significantly long-running employee of the council, would give Lutfur Rahman insights into how the others in the council operated. So that was the arrangement, de facto. And Dalby lied to me on behalf of Lutfur Rahman. So the lying by Dalby is more clearly evident because it is contained in the communications. And the lies that were contained in the communications that Afsana Begum sent me are less extensive because, as I have said, my communications with the other employees were far more long-ranging and long kind of running than my communications with Afsana Begum. And as I said, Afsana Begum entered the communications with me clearly on behalf of Wahid Ahmad and Lutfur Rahman. I had not contacted her proactively because I didn't know her name. I didn't know whether she was employed or not. And I didn't send any communications to anyone in the council based on any knowledge I had about them in the community. I didn't know this person. I now know that she is the daughter of somebody that I knew when I advised. That person is dead now, but I knew him in the Cannon Street Road area, in the Hassel Street area where he had a shop. And I advised him over a long period of time until he became a councillor. But he's deceased now. He's dead now. So I cannot make detailed comments about him, except to say that I later learned that Afsana Begum is his daughter. That's all I know. No connection with him and my knowledge of him at all. Now, Afsana Begum may or may not face a prison sentence or whatever. I don't know that. I cannot speculate on that, except to say that her kind of statements as released by her so-called lawyer, I don't know who the lawyer is at this stage, and her claim that housing was a lifeline, which is the reason why she thinks she is justified in having grabbed the kind of priority kind of allocation that she did grab in 2014. Now, that needs examining, not about just her. What is the definition of housing in Tower Hamlets? And who decides? Because, as I said, for 50 years, I have been asking questions about Tower Hamlets Council, and I have not received the answer. And that means that I have had to continue to campaign against corruption in Tower Hamlets Council, because the only explanation as to why there was no answer to straightforward questions about housing, who decides on housing allocations on behalf of the council. The only reason why those questions were not being answered could have been, would have been, must have been because they had things to hide. Because transparency and telling the truth would expose their corruption. So, again, about Steve Hill. Steve Hill is a practiced racist, lying criminal. That practiced racist, lying criminal completely abused my generosity and my kindness. And my determination to follow the law, follow the ethics, and follow the trail of accountability and democratic accountability continues unabated, because I want to set an example so that not just Tower Hamlets Council, but other councils can be stopped from being the dens of criminality that so many of them are and have been. I have to hasten at this moment to add the point, clarifier, that Labour MP in housing fraud rap is an inevitable headline, made inevitable by the operation of Tower Hamlets Council as a corrupt bureaucracy. I have created a lot of original phrases to describe Tower Hamlets Council as corrupt clique, corruptly controlled council, and the rest of it, based entirely on the evidence. When I say Steve Hill is a criminal, racist liar, I say that because of the evidence, not because I have no other phrases to describe Steve Hill. Now, it is ironic that Steve Hill has authorized the prosecution of the likes of Afsana Begum or the councillors that have been found guilty of housing fraud, including Muhammad Harun, Shahid Ali, and others. He has been authorizing the prosecution of councillors, and now, if he is still in post, the prosecution of Afsana Begum. And he has been doing this while he is still behaving as a criminal liar himself. Not in relation to those ones, but in relation to me. And it seems that the British judicial system has no room to look at his crimes committed against me, and through those criminality and crimes committed against the whole society and whole of humanity, because I am somebody that has been working to help the whole of humanity. So if Afsana Begum says that the grabbing by her of that allocation of a flat was a lifeline for her, then that language should be applied to the situation where I had been pushed by the criminals in Tower Hamlets Council who serially refused to provide me housing. That is something that is absolutely spot on. Spot on in all the senses. Spot on because it's topical. Spot on because it's true. And spot on because it could not be more appropriate and glaring. I have no agenda against Afsana Begum, who is young enough to be, if I had children, she would be my own child's age or younger, because I knew her father. And her father, I never compared his actual kind of chronological kind of age, but her father was probably my junior. So therefore, I have no agenda against her. But I have an agenda for integrity, accountability, ethics, and morality. And as she has been involved in communicating with me, she needs to know, and I'm going to make it known to her, that whatever she sent to me on behalf of Lutfur Rahman or Wahid Ahmad, she probably was doing that as part of her job, send something to X, Y, or Z. But in this case, whatever she sent to me was absolute untruthful lies. I'm not saying that she made up the lies, but I'm saying that she sent them to me. Whoever originally told her to send them to me was a liar or were liars. And the fact that Lutfur Rahman is being mentioned in the Sun today about the prosecution of Afsana Begum can only be justifiably mentioned as evidence of my prediction. I said in all my communications and my statements and diagnostic analytical points during the 2009 and 2010 signature campaign for an elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. I said, and I alone said, and I alone am saying now, that the community doesn't have the facilities. That is to say, all the organizations that operate in the name of the Bangladeshis in Tower Hamlets are not interested. All the organizations, other than the Khoodeelaar campaign, that is, they are not interested in a campaign against corruption. And when it comes to Tower Hamlets Council, they most certainly are, many of them, in fact, if not all of them, are part of the council's corruption. I'll give examples of two. One of them is the Channel S television channel on the satellite. And Channel S is not my invention. Channel S has been identified on the evidence and the facts of its behavior as being a corruptly controlled, corruptly operated outlet that colluded with and was complicit with Lutfur Rahman at every stage. So bad that the channel as a so-called chief reporter, which itself needs a qualification, was also at the same time being paid from public parcel, public money belonging to the people of Tower Hamlets by Lutfur Rahman, allegedly on the basis that that chief reporter was his media advisor or some kind of advisor. Now, at the time that I received that communication from Afsana Begum in 2013 on behalf of Ohid and or on behalf of Lutfur Rahman, I had been already in contact with that chief reporter, not because of his being a chief reporter, but because of his being in constant company with Lutfur Rahman. So I give two examples. One was that he was the third person present at the meeting I had with Lutfur Rahman on the 20th of September 2012 in the basement of a restaurant that is no longer in business in New Road called Marcos. Whatever happened to that, I don't know, but that is where I was invited to go and meet Lutfur Rahman. I was invited by Alibor Chaudhry on the phone to go and speak to Lutfur Rahman. And that was the time when I found that this chief reporter called Muhammad Zubair, Muhammad is spelled differently than my name, and Zubair is Jubair, Zubair. He and Alibor Chaudhry and Lutfur Rahman were the people that I met. So when I asked Lutfur Rahman at the beginning why Zubair was there, Lutfur Rahman said that he was a younger brother or something like that. But he wasn't there because he was a younger brother. For a start, there was no family relationship connection in that way between Lutfur Rahman and Zubair, because Zubair comes from one part of Silot and Lutfur Rahman comes from another part of Silot. So Lutfur Rahman had Zubair as an advisor present there. At the beginning of that conversation, Lutfur Rahman said to me, in a statement that I have referred to already many times, that he, Lutfur Rahman, should never have been in that position as the mayor. It should have been me. I should have been the first MP from the Bangladeshi community. That is how he put it. I should have been the first mayor, and words to that effect. Now, although it could be at a personal level kind of noted, that was not the purpose of that meeting, because I wasn't there to be assessed in terms of my suitability to become the MP or a mayor or whatever. I was there telling Lutfur Rahman that another criminal called Colin Cormack had been doing serious damage to my work and the cause by interfering with my housing. Now, Lutfur Rahman completely dishonestly and stupidly ignored or chose to ignore my consistent advice, legally consistent, evidentially consistent, and otherwise consistent in every way. Because Lutfur Rahman said that he would contact a man called Bashir Chaudhry and check if I could be given a private housing or whatever through Bashir Chaudhry. Now that was an additional criminality, because long before Lutfur Rahman kind of became a name or became part of the community. I had known Bashir Chaudhry, and there was no way that Bashir Chaudhry would do anything to solve the housing problem that had been created by Colin Cormack. We shall be continuing in the next part.